Hi, this is Jim Rapon with Coldwell Banker Danforth, and this is Seattle Real Estate Chat, episode 27. And we have several guests today, and I'm going to let everybody self-introduce themselves. Let's start with Rhonda, my co-host. Rhonda?
Oh, thanks, Jim. I'm Rhonda Porter. I'm a licensed loan officer at Mortgage Master Service Corporation, and I'm the author of the Mortgage Porter blog.
And Karen?
I'm Karen Willie. I'm an attorney in Seattle, and I do what is called water law, which includes landslides.
And George?
I'm George Peters. I'm the executive director of the Washington Land Title Association, and I still work with them on their educational programs, and I've written a few title-related articles, including one on water boundaries.
So today we're going to focus on the Oso Landslide and that disaster, which was just a horrible situation for anybody who is involved and lived there, or a family of there. Our hearts go out to them. But there's ramifications, real estate and legal-wise, about their property. And a lot of people have had questions about what happens in these events, and particularly for these folks, what may come down the pike in terms of, getting their property back, deciding where it is, when can they build on it, what happens if they have to walk away from it because their home is demolished and they can't pay their mortgage, those kinds of things. So let's just jump right into it. I think the first thing that everybody wonders is, with all that land and mass and trees moves and changes the whole geographical situation, how do you know where your land is, and how does that get decided? Karen, you want to start with that a little bit?
Sure, Jim. Hard question. I don't think you could survey it, and you certainly could survey it with GPS and find out exactly where your land is at this point. But I don't think that this land will ever be developed again. Many of the families want to have some sort of deed on the property that no one could ever purchase again. I've heard rumors that a memorial may be set up, so I don't believe that the land will be occupied again.
Okay, and George, this is sort of your purview too. You've done some of this in terms of where land gets decided. Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if this river had changed its course slowly over time, then the property on either side would, the boundaries would adjust. But in this case, the action was considered evulsive, whether it's man-made or natural, and in this case maybe there's a question about which applies here. But in either event, the people who lived on the river, in fact all the property there, their boundaries were unchanged. And so, as Karen indicated, you could certainly go out at some point and find your property corners. The surface where your house used to be might be several feet lower than where it is today. The state could come in and grade all that away, and perhaps it's possible to rebuild there, but it's not likely. Aside from that, your property boundaries would still be the same. Two other issues that would be important if you wanted to reoccupy the property would be whether you would be on the river anymore. If your property was right on the river, then and the river in the new channel is no longer where it was, you may not have water access anymore. On the other hand, the new river channel might be running right over your property, and you'd have to basically live with that. And the state would be involved with working with all these property owners. As Karen said, maybe everybody will walk away and something else will be done with the property. But two things: the boundaries are unchanged, and the title to the land, under the water, under the mud, is unchanged and will remain unchanged until people take action.
So since it's unchanged, this is the part that's kind of puts me in a fog, because I mean the reality is to everybody else is that it has changed, and if it moved to where the channel, the water channel, now runs right through your property, a river run through it, could you build your house right in the middle of the river, or I mean, what would you do? Would you be liable for taxes on a piece of a river, or how would that work?
Yes, the tax situation would be unchanged. The title would be unchanged. You couldn't really go out and probably couldn't even build on the property right away, even if the river wasn't right over it. because you still are subject to all the regulatory issues. You'd have to get a building permit, and would the building permit be possible where you now are, there's water on your property? People are not allowed in any event to go out to the stream in front of their house and build a little dam and divert it so that it doesn't affect their property. You just can't do that anyway. And certainly after this disaster, even more so. I doubt seriously that it would be possible for most of this property to be developed just because of all the new regulatory issues, pollution issues, contamination issues, and the danger of further mudslides or changes in the rivers. So, again, as I said before, however, that doesn't change the fact that you own the property. If the property is now owned by the heirs of people who were living there and they're deceased, well, then they own the property, and any actions with respect to the property, they would be doing it.
So given that that's probably what's going to happen here, is that it's not going to be developed, what's going to be the situation for those homeowners who were, let's say they had a $400,000 mortgage on a home and land, and now everything's gone and they can't afford to pay it because they now have to get other housing? Karen, can you speak to that? What do you think is going to be how's this going to play out for them?
Sure, Jim. It's actually pretty horrible for the families. What will happen is if there's a big mortgage like that, it depends on what bank it is. A local bank has forgiven mortgage, and I understand Chase Bank has also forgiven mortgage. We're going to be negotiating with other banks, asking them to forgive mortgages of our clients. If they won't do that, they usually will not do a judicial foreclosure, because then they would own the property. And as has been pointed out, it's contaminated. It has, propane, God knows what it has on it. So the banks aren't going to want to own it. So what they will do is they will sue on the promissory note, and they'll sue the estate of the deceased if the family is deceased. And so you would hope that you could go to the banks and ask for some sort of relief. I know of one case where a person did go to the bank and they said, well, we'll hold off for 60 days, but we expect you to pay. And so, it's a bad situation for these families.
Yeah, that's not really relief. That's just more stress. What am I going to do in 60 days? That's not an answer.
Well, and to pay, let's say $1,000 a month for a piece of land that is totally destroyed. And I've been out there, and it's huge mountains of mud, and
Right.
It's as if it came in waves, and no person is going to have the ability to clear off 2 to 3 stories of mud off their property and then build something. I mean, it makes no sense.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. So is bankruptcy an alternative for those folks in those situations?
No, the estate can't go bankrupt, and so there'll be claims against the estate. In some cases, there might be insurance money. We were successful in one case to pull down the flood insurance of one of our clients. And so sometimes, oftentimes on your homeowner's insurance, if you have a landslide on your property, if it's described as a mudslide, there is no coverage because it is one of the exempt things. However, there was water involved as well. If there's any type of flood insurance on the property, eventually FEMA, even if you are through, like, say, State Farm or Farmers or somebody like that, eventually FEMA is who pays out on those. And it just depends. If you have a lawyer writing a letter saying, come on, or on the phone saying, come on, why don't you pay this as flood insurance, you're more likely to get it. When people call up their insurance agent or adjuster, the adjusters are all trained to say, no, there's absolutely no coverage. This is a landslide, no coverage whatsoever. So even if you get insurance proceeds, most deeds of trust will say in them that if you get insurance proceeds, that those go to the mortgage, the bank. And oftentimes insurance companies will even write the check out to the bank and the property owner's estate. We're advising clients to make sure that they get 2 checks, one for the property and one for the contents, because the banks are not entitled to the contents, and you would not want the insurance companies to just glump that all together.
Yeah. That makes sense. And you know, we hear a lot about insurance, the flood insurance, the national flood insurance that the federal government encourages people who are in flood-prone areas to get. That doesn't affect landslides at all, right?
That's correct, but we've been successful at getting flood proceeds for one.
Oh, okay. And I guess now that I think about it, it's not just the landslide, because that landslide then blocked the river that then flooded a bunch of other farmland.
Right, especially for
behind
the
it.
people, yeah. So the people who are right on, who were not hit by the mud, but they lost property or personal property or real estate because they were flooded. FEMA should pick that up. But even in questionable cases where you know the mudslide hit first, there's still an argument to ask that FEMA pay.
Okay. Rhonda, do you have any questions around this?
I do. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, Seattle's a very hilly area and has had landslides in the past. I'm wondering what Seattle homeowners should do to make sure that they are protected, I guess, against something like this.
Either of you want to take this up?
Sure, there actually is a study of Seattle. I always advise people who are looking at homes to buy to go online. City of Seattle has a study that was done by Shannon and Wilson, and they list by address all of the houses that have ever had a landslide, kind of going back to the 1920s and 30s. So you can check and see if your address is there. Another thing you can do is check if you're on the railroad tracks, if you're above them. Check with the railroad and see if they've had any complaints over the years of mud sliding down at that mileage number of the railroad tracks. Another thing you can do is look at aerials. If it's a new construction, it will have a covenant that will pop up on title when you ask for the title policy. And then if you're buying a house, get a geotechnical engineer and have that person do a study for you, and it's worth the money.
So I had a situation kind of like that. I had a client a few years ago who they hired Shannon and Wilson because there was a property on Perkins Lane that they fell in love with, and sure enough, they found that there had been 4 significant landslides on that property and 3 others around it in the last 30, 40 years. And they were wondering if they could move forward and still somehow protect themselves. And we couldn't find any way for them to do that. I mean, they could get discovery and they could find out about it, but there wasn't much they could do to protect themselves and move forward with the property. Is that kind of your experience as well?
Yeah, and I have done a bunch of cases on Perkins Lane, including the 1700 block that is still without any houses. There have been a couple developers who've looked at that, thinking that there's six lots, thinking of trying to do something. What they would have to do is some sort of condominium structure. They have those on Alki, and so the back of the condominium structure is made into a catchment wall, and so it acts, especially if the landslide is going to be what's called a colluvial landslide, which is a landslide that's of the landslide debris that's like 4 or 5 feet deep. It's not like a deep block landslide. And so then the debris can flow down, and then it can be carted off and cleaned out. And so there are some things you can do as a builder. In terms of moving into a house, depends on where on Perkins Lane. If it's one of the areas that has deep-seated block landslides, there's not a lot you can do. Some people put in deep wells, and so if you pump the water out, it's possible to protect your house that way, but that gets to be pretty cost prohibitive. You know, you put in a real deep structure underneath, and then if you put in pumping wells, but that's usually outside of the norm of what people can pay for.
Right, right. And there's also the liability issue that that either brokers or sellers can run into if they find out about this and don't disclose it when they go to sell. We have the seller's disclosure form, Form 17. You're probably familiar with it as an attorney, much more than I am, but I'm pretty intimately aware of it too, because we have to tell our clients, listen, you need to disclose everything that you know here. It's a yes, no, I don't know, but you have to be truthful, and you're subject to fraud if you were to try to deceive someone, and they can prove that. But there's specific things about this type of thing, questions in the form that they ask, and I believe it was, and Karen, maybe you know this, the exact date of this, but I think it was 4 to 6 years ago. The statute was revised where they changed the environmental section of that, Section 7, where they required some places of that disclosure form you can just waive it or not have to fill it out. You're not required. But the environmental section you are required, even under new construction and things like that, to fill it out. And specifically are asking about landslides, water issues, property movement, that kind of settling, that kind of stuff. So it's important that sellers understand that they have a duty to disclose the truth about what they know. And if there's been studies done, they need to reference them. If there's been any kind of reports done, they probably should attach them. And if they have any questions, they should probably call an attorney, because they don't want, the last thing they want is to have that line of liability to come back to them, which is what could happen, right?
Yes, and a lot of people don't understand that if you're the seller, the safest thing for you to do is to disclose, disclose, disclose.
Right.
You know, so we have a lot of clients who have landslide properties. Things get resolved. A couple of years later, they want to sell, and we always advise them to attach all the reports, like what you're saying, or go to a link at the City of Seattle. Here's a report you can read. Get a and advise your buyer to get a geotechnical engineer, and so that will safeguard the seller. The problem is that in a lot of these cases, and in the Oso area, a lot of them were bank foreclosures, and that same duty does not exist for banks. So it's a little horrifying. I mean, we have a case right now where our client, the bank foreclosed on her property, and the bank had no duty, and the bank knew that there's still an active landslide on the property, and the bank sold it for quite a bit of money, and now the people are fixing it up to sell. And so the bank didn't have any duty to disclose, and the new sellers probably don't know what's going on the land. So, you know, banks, I think it'll be interesting if there are some banks that foreclosed, knew of the situation at Oso, and then had people take out mortgages with them, and now want those people to pay those mortgages. So we're looking into that too.
So I guess there is no easy magic bullet to get out of any of this. The safest thing to do is, if you find any situation where there's potential landslides or potential water issues, if you're looking to purchase, is don't purchase it. I mean, in terms of the maximum amount of safety is to move on. But if you want to take on those risks, you need to do it, you know, with your eyes wide open that you're taking on those risks. There's nothing you can do that can fully mitigate and shield you from those risks and those liabilities, right?
That's right. But I think, or I at least hope, that we'll see a real change because of Oso. I think that we'll see the geotechnical community disclosing a lot more and more fully. Someone trying to build on the flat property of Oso, they probably were not warned, hey, look, you know, this is an active landslide area. A lot of people had no notice. I also hope that municipalities take a hard look at themselves. Snohomish County doesn't have covenants like what the City of Seattle has. It contemplated buying out these properties. Didn't give any notice that I know of to the families of, gee, we're looking at either buying you out because it's so dangerous, or we're thinking of trying to do something for the toe of the slope here. I don't know that people in that community had any notice. So I would hope that municipalities would change how they act.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, we're wrapping up on 20 minutes again. It happens really fast. George, is there anything you want to add in under this about title and where you think things may change here in the future, or anything about this?
Well, there certainly wouldn't be anything that would affect the title side of things. I mean, it's all environmental and it's all land use. But you were correct. You have to go in with your eyes wide open, and there are a lot of rewards for owning waterfront property, whether you're on a lake or a river. but there are a lot of risks, and as long as you're willing to accept those risks, then maybe you can do it, and there may be some things you can do to mitigate the risk.
That's good. Okay. Well, I want to thank you, our guests, for joining us today. That was very helpful. I'm sure people will want to reference this. We'll have the replay on YouTube for those who weren't unable to attend here live. But this is quite a unusual event, and it's the type of esoteric topic we don't normally get questions about. But recently, it has really piqued people's interest, and I think it's kind of made us all more aware. And however unfortunate it has been for so many people, it's also brought other people into the awareness of this so that they know what they're getting into if they go down this path. So anyway, thanks again, everybody. Appreciate you joining us. Karen, you're with, why don't you give what's the name of your company again?
Terrell Marshall, Doubt, and Willie.
Okay, and if anybody wants to get hold of you for reference to this type of thing?
Sure, 206-223-1060.
Okay, and George, you do title and other things. You want to tell people how they can get hold of you best?
Probably the best way is to go to our website, WashingtonLandTitle.com, and
Okay.
there's a link to my contact information there.
Great. And Rhonda, I know how to get hold of you, but maybe people who are watching don't.
Probably the easiest way is my website at mortgageporter.com. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, great, yeah. And people can get a hold of me at seattle-realestate.com. So anyway, thanks again, everybody, and we'll see folks next week. Actually, next week we're taking a break. I hadn't told you about this, Rhonda. That's Memorial Weekend, and my nephew's graduating, and I'm going to be going to his service. So anyway, the week after we'll be here. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.